Hello, today I'm going to be showing you how I made this SAD-ist inspired Technoblade mask out of EVA foam and just an ungodly amount of hot glue, if I'm being honest. So in my last video I asked y'all what projects you wanted me to do, and I completely ignored them and I'm doing this instead. Trust me, I know y'all want the Revive book, I understand this. But I wanted to take a break from bookbinding for a little bit because cons are an actual thing this year, and me and my friend are adults and we decided that we wanted to use our money dressing up as Minecraft roleplay characters, so that's why this project came around. So I personally have a dream cosplay planned, which will be a whole video in the future, but my friend wanted to do Technoblade, and they really wanted the SAD-ist inspired mask, because everything SAD-ist does is beautiful and amazing, honestly, and we love the techno design. So I offered to make it for them because I already had a lot of the materials and the tools needed to do it, plus I would then have content for this video, so it's a win-win. Real quick, if you just so happen to stumble upon this channel, I'm planning on doing more Dream SMP inspired projects, so if you don't want to miss that, please consider getting a subscribe, and it really helps me out. Free, you can unsubscribe later, yada yada yada. Sellout timer done, let's get started with the video. So the first step of actually making the mask was making the base of it. Instead of starting completely from scratch, I decided to go with an already pre-made pattern made by Kami Cosplay. She is an amazing cosplay YouTuber, and I seriously suggest checking her out because most of the stuff I use in this video I learned from her. And this pattern is very obviously not a pig-shaped mask, but it's a good starting point. So after downloading the print files, it was just a matter of printing them out, taping them together, and then cutting out each of the individual pattern pieces. These patterns are basically the 2D shapes that will eventually form our mask. Next step is transferring all the patterns onto EVA foam. This foam is super great for making props because it is super flexible and pretty affordable. This whole roll was only 10 bucks on Amazon. Essentially what I'm doing right now is tracing each of the pattern pieces onto the foam and then reversing it and tracing again for the other side of the mask. Next, it's time to take some box cutter. Oh, I don't know why it looks like I'm mugging a camera there. Take the box cutters and cut out all the individual pieces, along all the lines that I traced from earlier. Some edges I had to cut at an angle to create a beveled edge. I just follow along with the pattern's instructions. With all my pieces cut out, it was time to start gluing them together. At first, I was using shoe glue because I think I read somewhere that it worked for foam really well. Later you'll see it wasn't exactly cutting it, but from there I just started gluing all the pieces together. And if you're wondering what these little notches are for, they're so you know how to align all the pieces together to fit the right way. To get the notches to align, you kind of have to pull the foam, and the shoe glue kind of wasn't working that well, so I gave up on that. Good thing we have old reliable hot glue. Now with hot glue it's a lot faster to work with and it's definitely a stronger bond, but you do get messier seams that you have to clean up later. But since I have no patience, this works for me. And once everything is glued together, we have our skull, which I think is supposed to actually go over your head, but I scaled mine way too small. Good thing for us, the goal is not to create a skull mask, it's the techno mask. Time to sacrifice for the blood god. That's another great thing about foam and hot glue. It's not permanent if you have a box cutter, and I can cut it into the shape that I want. So after removing the back of the skull, and also the weird little flap thingies that were in the front, we now have the base of the Technoblade mask. Now the next part got a bit tricky because I essentially had to figure out how to make a 3D snout out of 2D pieces. So I was kind of guessing on this part. I drawed out the snout and kind of made a cylinder, I suppose, around it, marked where I wanted it to meet the mask, and then basically made all the seams that I would cut out to be the pieces. Essentially reverse engineering to figure out what pattern pieces I needed to make the snout. And to save on materials, the foam that I used earlier, I'm going to cut out and use to cut the pieces for the snout. From here, it's similar steps with my previous pattern pieces of tracing it, then cutting it out, and then be hot glued together. And I will say, for guessing on this part, I'm pretty happy with how the final part came out. Next part is just sticking it on there with some hot glue. On the inside of the mask, I added an extra amount of hot glue just to make sure it was more secure, and no one's going to see that anyway, so it doesn't matter if it looks bad. I did, however, clean off some of the excess with the Dremel though. And now this is starting to look a lot more like a pig mask than a skull mask. Next step is to add these, I don't know what they're called, whiskers? But I don't think pigs have whiskers. These little spiky shapes at the edge of the mask. These were a lot easier to create patterns for because it was easy for me to just sketch it out on the side of the mask, cut out a paper one, trace it onto the EVA foam, cut it out, and then glue it onto the mask. Aw, look at the blood god's cute little whiskers. And I followed these steps through the bottom spikes as well. Proving again why EVA foam is just so great. You can just make whatever shapes you need. Remember what I said earlier about hot glue creating really messy and uneven seams? It's time to use the Dremel to sand away all of our mistakes so no one will know. I also use it to round out the cheekbones because they were looking a little too sharp. After sanding down a little bit of the seams, there's this great stuff called Quickie Seal, and you just spread it on and smooth it out with your finger, and then dip your finger in just a little bit of water to really smooth it out even more. After that dries, I hit it with the Dremel again, and I'll normally repeat this 2 to 3 times. And then finish it off using some sandpaper, or in my case, a nail file, to finish sanding by hand. I normally spend a ton of time on this part to make it look as smooth as possible. Now it's time to add the ears. The ears pretty much follow the same steps as before of sketching out the shape, tracing it onto EVA foam, cutting it out, and then gluing it on. I will admit though, the foam didn't fold over as much as I wanted to, so they end up looking a little bit more dog-like than pig-like, but we'll just ignore that. The last things to make are the tusks. For these, I'm going to be using a thicker 10mm EVA foam. Similar to before, I sketch up the shape I want. However, this time I'm going to trace and cut the shape 4 times, and then glue the pairs together. Now, if we were making square tusks, this would be done, but we're not. So we're going to take our Dremel and we're going to round out the edges of it, and basically carving it into the shape I want. Now seems like a good time to remind you, if you are using a Dremel, make sure to wear safety goggles. Anyway, here's a comparison of before and after it was carved down. I'm actually going to wait to glue these on so it'll be easier for your painting process later. Last thing to do is some carving on the snout, and then we'll be ready for painting. With all the parts complete, it's now time to prime it with some Plastidip. To apply this, you need a well-ventilated area, so I went out onto my balcony to spray this on. I apply about 3 even layers to the mask. Plastidip is great because not only is it priming it so the paint will stick to the foam, it goes on super smooth and super shiny and smooths out the surface. Even with all the sanding, you can still see some of the seams up when you look up close, but from a distance you can hardly even tell. Finally, we are to the painting step. This was pretty straightforward. I applied, I think, 3 to 4 coats of acrylic paint to the mask and to the tusks as well, until you have opaque coverage. Next, I took a dark purple color and started painting in the shadows of the mask. With an even darker purple, I had some harsher lines, and then while I was painting, I decided to add eyebrows because he does normally have them in the animations to show expression, but I'm not sure exactly how I feel about them. And now that everything's painted, I glue on the tusks. And the outside paint job is complete, and it looks so good, and it makes you forget about the inside, which doesn't even matter because no one's going to see it, who cares? Alright, we're getting close to the end, and the next step is the eyes. Since his eyes are solid white, I'm going to be using white Buckram fabric. It gives the appearance of being solid, but it does have an alright amount of visibility for it. Yeah, totally just ignore the fact that one tusk is just missing. Yeah, apparently the hot glue didn't stick to the paint as well, so my solution was just sticking a toothpick through it, and yeah, this totally looks safe to wear. Don't worry, I broke off the toothpick close to the foam and then covered up any sharp part with hot glue, so it's definitely not going to stab my friend. After fixing that, I continued gluing on the eyes. Did you know Buckram's actually the same material that they use for furry eyes? But this totally doesn't make that a furry mask, right? For the last step, I decided to be very extra and break out my new sewing machine that I totally know how to use with utmost confidence. What I'm going to do is to make the straps for the mask is I'm going to take this fake leather and I'm going to clip the sides down, and then figuring out my sewing machine enough to sew literally a straight line in the most basic stitch. I sewed down the edges to make it look like a finished belt, but I still managed to mess up sewing in a straight line somehow. But I know what you're thinking, how will we ever attach it? Hot glue. Of course it's hot glue. It's literally the only thing that I know that works and I have patience for. And again, it's the inside of the mask. Who cares if it looks bad? And the last thing to do is to cut a part in the middle. That way I can add Velcro to each end. That way it'll be a bit adjustable and really easy to get on and off. And with that, our mask is done. And there we have it, our completed Technoblade mask. I hope you enjoyed the video. The next few videos are going to be more cosplay centric, but don't worry, I will be doing more bookbinding projects in the future. If you enjoyed, don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see y'all in the next video. Technoblind.